Hi, my name is Varnell. I will be doing a video report on my career choice. My career choice is ministry, specifically involving teaching and Christian leadership. This video report will be talking about different subjects and the roles of Christian leadership, teaching, and ministry. This report will cover three main points. The first, we'll talk about two organizations called Team and Send, and what they're about and what their main purpose and role is. The second body will be talking about what teaching looks like involved with ministry and the post-secondary teaching job, and what teaching also looks like in Christian leadership in a church. And the third point will be talking about specific topics in modern biblical theology, which are buzzwords in our modern context regarding biblical teaching. So for my first point, in my first body, I will be talking about Team and Send. So both of the professional organizations, Team and Send, are very similar, but they have two significant differences. So I'll talk about Send first. So Send is an organization, and their statement is mobilizing God's people and engaging the unreached in order to establish reproducing churches. So what that means is Send is an organization that creates missionaries and sends them to different parts of the world so that those missionaries may plant church. Now the key point about Send is Send will rise up and create and train individual missionaries. So someone will apply for Send. Send will train them, teach them how to go and plant churches, and then they will send them to a specific country or place, and that person will plant a church. You can learn all about Send and their organization in the About page of Send International 2019. That is send.org/about. So Team is similar to Send, the organization Team. Their statement is Team helps churches send missionaries to establish reproducing churches among nations to the glory of God. So Team is about planting churches too and sending missionaries in different parts of the world to plant churches in non-Christian areas. Now the difference between Team and Send is Team is about partnering with an existing missionary or church. So instead of training and raising up new missionaries, Team will partner with someone who's already a missionary or a church that is sending missionaries to plant churches, and they will provide financial support, training, prayer, all sorts of things. So Team is a professional organization about teaming with a current or church or missionary. You can find way more information about Team on the page Team Global Alliance of Churches and Missionaries. That is Team 2019 on team.org. So how do these organizations apply to what I want to do in Christian leadership and teaching? Well, I want to get into some form of church planning or Christian leadership, and likely in an area that is predominantly not a Christian area. Like Texas is a Christian area, but maybe the northeast of America or in other parts of the world. Now, in order to be involved in any kind of Christian leadership, or especially teaching oriented, you have to have high accolades. So, for example, post-secondary teaching. Part of what I want to do when I am in Christian leadership is do post-secondary teaching on the side. And I would teach in my position as a Christian leader at a church, and I would also go to a university maybe nearby and teach on biblical theology. Now, in order to be any kind of pastor in a church, especially in America, or to be sent by an organization like Team or Send, and to be a post-secondary teacher, you will almost always, there are exceptions, need a master's degree or higher. Now, this is needed because to be a Christian leader or a post-secondary teacher, you would need impeccable understanding of biblical theology, because there's no room for misunderstanding something that the Bible teaches or that the church would teach, because people obviously place their full life and full values on what you teach them. And so if you have a misrepresentation in the church or in university level teaching of something like theology, you are essentially misleading the very essence of what someone believe. This is where it's a little different than maybe teaching geology, because obviously you need to be impeccable in your understanding of a field like geology, but not as many people place their full essence and belief and value system off geology. So it's absolutely important you have a complete understanding of teaching and Christian leadership. In the Occupational Outlook Handbook on Post-Secondary Teachers, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, 13 September 2019. That's on the website bls.gov. They talk about the outlook of post-secondary teachers growing. It will approximately grow, the position will approximately grow for biblical theology 11% in the next 10 years. So what often happens with a post-secondary teacher is they pick a specific topic in biblical theology, and they will focus on that topic. So in light of that, buzzwords and modern topics that post-secondary teachers would teach on, or a Christian leader would teach on, there are two big ones that stick out to me. There are lots of modern issues that in biblical theology that are argued or are studied or researched and disagreed on between many different people. I picked specific two, so I drew my information and research from a guy named Andreas Kostenberger. He writes from his organization called Biblical Foundations in a series called Current Issues in New Testament Studies. That's found on biblicalfoundations.org, Current Issues in New Testament Studies. His first issue is biblical theology itself, actually, in the study of biblical theology. This is a massive issue in Christian understanding and in Christian leadership and post-secondary teaching. Biblical theology, study of biblical theology is very relevant to modern theology, because everybody has their own Bible. Everybody can read on, and most people can read on their own. And the Bible is very hard to read. It has lots of meanings, lots of tie-ins, lots of interpretation, lots of different types of books, and it obviously was originally written in a different book. So it's extremely important. People have a extremely impeccable understanding of how to read the Bible. So Kostenberger gives three examples of how to study the Bible. He says it should be highly descriptive, meaning you don't mix personal theology with what the Bible says. People should seek only 100% what the Bible says. Secondly, the New Testament has to be read historically. So when you read the New Testament, you have to read it in the context that it was written. So if I'm reading, say, the letter of Ephesians, I have to know Paul wrote it to Ephesus and what was going on in Ephesus at the time in that city, what the class of people were. All these things apply to when I read the book of Ephesians. What am I reading and why am I reading it? How am I reading it? This goes for all of the Bible. Thirdly, it must not be inductive. It must be inductive, not deductive, meaning it does not subject the Bible to one's own interpretation, but strives to study it as it was meant to be read. This means that when I study the Bible, I cannot interpret and say, oh, this is what I think it means. I have to read the Bible and seek to understand what the Bible is trying to say. Not what I want it to say, but what it wants to say. Another main topic in biblical theology and study in post-secondary teaching and Christian leadership today is study of New Testament Greek. This Kostenberger also talks about this in his section on New Testament Greek and Biblical Foundations on his website. New Testament Greek is extremely important because we have to know what the genuine language was and what the words mean. Language is extremely important to understanding, meaning Kostenberger argues that this is one of the most important issues in reading the New Testament is what was it originally written in, what did the language say, and how should I read this language compared to other types of Greek languages, because like any language, the Greek evolved throughout time, so I have to know when the New Testament was written, what was the type of Greek that was used. He also talks about an issue called exegesis, which means to critically interpret the text. So an example of exegesis would mean if I read in the Old Testament an example of a guy named Uzziah who becomes sick because he was disobedient to God. Exegesis means I don't read that literally, which means I can read Uzziah becoming sick because he was disobedient to the Lord, as I will become sick because I'm disobedient to the Lord. But that's not exactly what it's saying. Using context clues in other parts of the Bible, I can prepare a sermon or a post-secondary lesson about this issue of Uzziah becoming sick, and instead of telling someone you're going to become sick if you're disobedient to the Lord, the meaning is, and the point of Uzziah becoming sick is not that I will become physically ill, but simply that God takes disobedience seriously, if that makes sense. So overall, these are the main issues and topics and what a career looks like in studying biblical theology. There's so much more to go into this career, but that is what my recent research has to do with this. Thank you for listening, and I hope this was at all interesting.